Well, let's get this kicked off. I am really excited about the official launch of a new course on Growing the Future Mastermind called Dr. Copper Prairie Prognosis. And this first session is going to be free. We wanted to introduce people to the concept, but long term, this is going to be a course inside of the mastermind that's going to be recorded, and there'll be transcripts and all that stuff. And we'll probably turn Dr. Ieuan Evans into a robot eventually, a little avatar, AI avatar that you can talk to. But uh, thanks so much for joining us this morning. As always, you can, as a participant in the audience today, you can interact with Ian by putting your comments and questions into the chat. This is recorded, and this replay is going to go into the mastermind. And our guest today is a true prairie legend. You can tell by the signups. It was really a veritable who's who in the industry, the best of the best, coming out to hear what this man has to say. We were talking in the green room before launch here, and he said, I've been in agriculture for 80 years. He's got 80 years experience. If he was applying for a job at your organization, it would say I have 80 years of experience because he started working on the farm at 5, and he's still going strong in many aspects. He's been working in decades on the science of soil health and micronutrients and disease with Alberta Agriculture and Agri-Trend, and he bred his own cherry. I don't know if you've tasted it, the Evans cherry, and he's a big grain news guy. And we took all that and we kind of formed a course around it. And Evan's going to be walking through all of his experience and knowledge with us, starting today. So thank you all for joining. Feel free to jump in anytime. Ian's going to tell us a little bit about his background, a little bit about his agronomic philosophy, which is very unique, very original. We're going to capture it all. I'm so excited about gathering experts like Dr. Ieuan Evans and sharing them with you over time. And I really appreciate Mr. Evans, you coming on and starting this journey with us to do a download on everything that you know. How long is it going to take for us to get through your 80 years of knowledge? Ian, what do you think?
About 5 years.
5 years. Okay, strap in. It's a 5-year journey, but welcome everyone. Where did you want to start? I mean, tell us a little bit about your 80 years experience for anyone that might not know you.
I can say good morning, guten Morgen in German, which I had to learn in those days, become a PhD.
Yeah.
Bonjour, Canada. And then I'll say bore da, which is the Welsh word for good morning. That's the language I spoke until I was about 10,
I
which
didn't know we were going to get
realized
a language on a lesson on languages here.
So what can you deal in siarad Cymraeg? Anyway, I grew up on a mixed farm, and a mixed farm then was 20 acres. We didn't have big farms, but the point is, each acre had 2 cows or 5 sheep. I mean, Wales, for example, right now has it's 8,000 square miles, and it's about 1/100th the size of the prairies. And right now, well, maybe some of them are missing now, but it's got 10 million sheep and 1 million cows in that small area. Canada, on the other hand, has only 1 million sheep when you look at the size of the land, eh? And when you look at land instead of intensive cultivation, we hear words like, oh, we're running out of land in Canada. Well, I mean, Britain uses 36% of its land, US uses 37% of its land mass for crops. China 76%, and Canada 5.5%. Yes, we're running out of land in Canada for crop production. So, I mean, you listen to these people, go ahead. But anyway, what I'm going to say is when I was born in 1940, I was born during a blitz, by the way, a German blitz, because we were next to a munitions factory in South Wales. There were 2 billion people in the world. Now there are 8 billion people, 4 times. Look at the difference in size, 2 billion to 8 billion. And when I remember the 50s, the starvation in India and China, and you get these anti-pesticide nitwits going around, moaning and groaning and telling us how we're poisoning ourselves. And when I was born, the average age was like 55, the average life cycle. Now it's up to 80. I mean, what's gone wrong? We've gotten better and whatever. But anyway, that's an introduction. In other words, I grew up growing fruits, vegetables, grain, corn, you know, you name it all, because as a small farm, you were pretty well self-sufficient. our own, cows, sheep, pigs, chickens, poultry, vegetables, potatoes. You learned them all. You didn't learn one. You weren't one-trick ponies. I mean, a lot of people now are one-trick ponies, eh? But and the same thing with academics. Then I went to University of Wales. I played on the best rugby team in in the country in UK. That is. No, I wasn't a quiet individual. I got lots of my teeth bashed out and bones and broken and all kinds of ailments from rugby, but I'm still around. Uh, if I had known that I was going to live this long, I'd have taken better care of myself. But this, so essentially, I have 80 years of farm experience because in Florida, I got a scholarship there. In other words, after I graduated from University of Wales, I uh, I got sort of lots of money from a foundation in Pennsylvania to study in the U.S. And I actually took 10 years from university, beginning at university to getting a PhD. That's a long time, but I took every course available. Things like soil sciences, maths, I took physics, I took chemistry, I went into virology, viruses, nematology, which entomologists don't know anything about, nematodes. I took micronutrients, which the horticulturalists do a lot of work with, which the soil scientists do very little with. So when I was stepping into those areas with micronutrients, for example, I'd get soil scientists, challenge. Oh, we know it. I'd say, when did you get any courses on it? Did you know anything about it? And the answer would be no. And the same thing then would happen, say, with say entomology. I talk about aphids, and I said I worked with them for years. How would you know about this? It was always the challenge. Veterinarians who would say things like, "Well," I'd say, "Well, if you have a problem with your cattle, get an animal nutritionist. Get the right specialist." You need to get the right specialist to get the right answer. A vet, for example, does a wonderful job as a veterinarian for ailments and whatever. But does he know anything about micronutrients in cattle? No. You just ask for an animal nutritionist. And then when it comes to, say, soils, if you ask a soil scientist, all he says is NP and K. And he reminds, oh, yes, but sulfur. They don't even put it on the label, by the way, sulfur. Ammonium phosphate, I was always amazed. 1620. What about the sulfur? Well, it was Ontario because we had manana from heaven, pollution, sulfur. But
Right.
yes, there was 14% sulfur in there. So anyway, get on to this. I still look around. I still move, pretty well. I live in west of Edmonton, and I keep an eye on lots of fields. I keep going down these range roads and seeing what's happening. And I'm really happy in some of the ways. This is very fertile land west of Edmonton. A lot of Dutchmen, a lot of potatoes. The little potato company is right here next to me.
Mm.
Well, they do well and they follow things like I see fields of wheat now that generally turn 70, 80, 90 bushels. But I also see fields of wheat that lodge and fall flat. And you go, what's the problem? I drive by and look and I keep, I tend to move slowly. People didn't like driving with me because I was always 1 foot, one wheel on the on the shoulder. But if you stop and look and you say, why does this feel lodged and why does this feel fine? And they're both on opposite sides of the range road. Well, the answer is fairly simple, but it's complex for many people to understand, certainly for soil scientists. What has happened is that land has been farmed for 100 years, maybe longer. Well, it's sandy soil, lots of organic matter in it, and some of the nutrients have been taken out. They put the NP and K back. Now they're putting the sulfur back. I had a big battle on that one time. I can explain that because when I came here, oh, you didn't put sulfur with crops; it wasn't needed. But anyway, the fertilizers you put on were ammonium sulfate or ammonium phosphate. But anyway, am I going too fast? Maybe I
No,
shouldn't.
I think you're doing great. And I just wanted to
But
remind everybody, hopefully the chat's working here. If anybody has any questions, throw it in there. If someone
yeah,
wants to give me a thumbs up to show it's
and
working.
I'm moving in the direction where you need answers. I hope you need answers, and I hope I can answer them. Because you remember,
Absolutely.
far too many of our scientists here are too remote from you, or they've never heard of the word "I was wrong, I made a mistake." I'm sorry, I'll tell you, or I'll change my mind. Because many people, when they adhere to something, they'll stick with it through hell or high water.
Right.
Just like, the guy who lost the 2020 election, he lost it. It's a total lie, but he won't change that. But anyway, um, if um, if looking at these fields, I would say on the range roads, why one field is lodged all to hell, and the other field looks good. Well, I did remember those fields because I did take a note of them because they were convenient. They were both seeded late April. They came up nicely in early May, and they caught the early rains in later May, and they did really well because we only had 7 or 8 inches of rain here, but it was an inch a month type thing, at least inch a week, I should say, in June and July.
Yeah.
Well, the one field on the in the west stood up, and it looked really good. I say guess it at 80 to 90 bushels. Now I've won competitions on guessing, so I'm not too far out. Uh, I even won one in Saskatchewan over a whole pile of people.
Oh,
Ben
nice.
Moody had to give me $10.
Yeah.
I mean, right, that field was fine. Now, that field was actually seeded to potatoes a year earlier. Now, the spud growers here put the kitchen sink on. They put NPKs and micros on because seed potatoes are expensive, and they put the thing on. Now, the field across to the east, they hadn't, I had never seen potatoes in it. Well, what the point is, now, that field lodged badly, and it was a week or two behind. The field to the west, the good one, that is, I'll call, that went 90 bushels, was taken off in late August, early September. The field to the east was not until mid-September, and I doubt if he took more than 50 or 60 bushels of sample off it because of the lodging in the field. Now, that individual obviously doesn't think because every farmer in that area or most farmers in that area now know that that land, because it's light sandy soil, is copper deficient soil. So they either put foliar copper or they apply 5 to 10 pounds of actual copper, and it's expensive. Getting hold of bluestone is expensive and slow these days. God knows, but if enough people want it, we can get it. But the point is, that land was copper deficient. That's all, and because the moisture was coming in drip drabs, the roots stayed near the surface. Now, there's two kinds of reasons why roots stay to the surface. It rains every week for an inch, and the roots stay near the surface, or it rains like hell, and the subsoil gets saturated and the roots stay near the surface. If the roots stay near the surface, that's the area that's been depleted of copper. And I keep saying that. It's been depleted because every crop you take off, including cattle, you take off a couple of grams of copper, maybe a quarter of an ounce of copper. You take it off that land. And if you sell the wheat, you take it off. If you sell the straw, you take it off. But I'm glad to say what I'm really feeling happy about is almost all the fields in my area now, I'm not saying I'm responsible, but almost all the fields now use straw choppers because I can give you a total thing on 20 reasons why a farmer should never sell a bale of straw or a bale of residue, crop residue. 20 reasons. I'll do that another time if you want to. I'll go through the reasons what that does to the soil. Because when you take the straw off, you take the water holding capacity off it. And right, this field, now almost all the farmers are straw chopped. The one to the west, the wheat was left high and it's standing there. It was cut at about 6 inches high. Good snow trap because the wind blows in those areas. Now, the one to the east, he leveled it, he cut it short, and he worked it very well. So, quite a bit, some of the topsoil can now blow into the ditches this winter if it's a windy April or whatever. So, and the fact that by working that soil, he's broken the roots, the plants, the oat plants, the wheat plants, I should say, allowing water to percolate in the soil. There's more tendency to run off that field, that worked over field, than the field that's been left alone. So, I mean, there are farmers who are catching up and farmers who don't listen. Don't tell me. Because, you see, crop growing, and I'll emphasize it, and you can argue with me if you want to, it's a science, it's a fact. I mean, I can tell you about organic growing if you have to, but most of it is lies. And you can't grow. I mean, when people show beautiful broccoli that's clean and nice here, they've grown it in the prairies, rubbish. I mean, when you think of the bugs that go after it, it's impossible. But it's considered to be better, but it's only a belief. It's not a fact. Fact is, crops that we grow now are pretty good. They can be, though, because we grow them in volume. Remember this: if you grow 100 bushels of wheat, the amount of zinc and copper, let's say, in that 100 bushels per pound of grain may be less than a field of 30 bushels, because in the 30 bushel wheat may have taken up a little more zinc and copper per unit of grain, whereas the bigger yield is more diluted. It had enough to get a good crop, it had enough to set, it had enough to grow, but there was no spare or extra copper or zinc or anything sitting in that plant. So consequently, the thing is, with higher yields, you have to give your cattle supplemental zinc, copper, manganese, because there's less in the food. And every farmer who's growing worthwhile beef or dairy, check with them. They feed their cattle supplemental micronutrients. And the grain farmers haven't twigged yet that they are running out of it. Because, and you can grow land forever. When people say this land is destroyed or damaged, nonsense. I lived on a farm where the land had been in production for 1,000 years. It was still good land. It still produced 30 bushels of wheat because we went into fertilizers and we had no pesticides. And the only reason we treated the wheat with mercury was to kill off the pigeons who ate the wheat, not the disease. But in other words, in other words, you have to remember that when you crop land, you're taking things off it. I'll deal with the buffalo sometime for you, or bison if you want to be if you want to be correct. I'll deal with bison on the prairies because this ideal thing about how wonderful they were for the prairies. Well, nothing was ever taken off them. They died on the prairies. The bears ate them, the wolves ate them, the whatever birds ate them, the droppings. The indigenous people who lived there had no flush toilets. They did it whenever they had to, right on the open prairies. So everything was recycled. Everything was recycled. Nothing was taken off. That's how you build up soil. So anyway, I think that way anyway. So you have to remember that. In other words, what you take off, you must replace. You know what I mean? I'm a sort of a hands-on plant pathologist, but I initially University of Florida was quite good. I went to the University of Guelph and I became a plant pathologist there. I taught courses in plant pathology. But I found the university was remote from agriculture a bit. It was not in touch with it. It didn't get into it. So when I had a chance to come to Alberta, fantastic. I was able to get right in there and work with farmers, with growers. And we really got into things that, in other words, you got your hands dirty. In other words, that was Alberta Ag. And we had some fantastic individuals. In other words, we worked with people like Elson Solberg, Doug Penny, Jill DeMulder, lots of really Mike Dolinsky, lots of really good people who knew what they're doing. So when
Yeah.
you looked at things, you may not always agree, but you always came to correct conclusions after you hammered a few things out. But when it came to the copper thing, I we didn't know what it was initially because why were yields every time it was a wet year in central Alberta, in places like Camrose, in places like Red Deer. What we figured out eventually, mind you, go back to it, was about 35 to 40% of Alberta can be copper deficient. Not always, depends on the season, and maybe about 11 to 12%, maybe 15% of Saskatchewan and then a lot in Manitoba, about 20 to 25%. Now, we figured that what was the problem? And we worked with lupinning and stuff, and I did anyway, and a few others. And we thought, first of all, that the failure of the crop to go 70 and you end up with 30 or 40 was a fungal, a bacterial disease. It was called Pseudomonas. But we could never get that to be a pathogen. We couldn't reproduce it, you know what I mean? So we got frustrated. And then Lou Peening did some work at Lacombe and put some copper because he'd seen this work done in Kenya. He went on a year's trip to Kenya, when you think of people going on trips, and he found that because the wheat didn't grow well there, the farmers were putting copper with the wheat, and they got huge yield increases in the Aberdare Highlands of Kenya. So when Lou came back, he did the same thing at the one of his fields close by in Lacombe, and he got huge yield increases, and he wasn't quite sure of that. And of course, plant pathologists like soil scientists, they all poo-pooed it. This must be the only field in all of North America that responds to copper. This is unique. And Lou got browbeaten, actually, in other words, for proposing it. So, being a group in Edmonton, we got hold of it. And no, Lou Peening is right. So we started looking around, and we found that we could get huge increases in wheat and barley in this area by applying copper. So we put in field trials west of Edmonton, and this was land that where wheat and barley would lodge and was terrible. Well, when we put the trials in and we put copper in, high copper levels, 20 pounds an acre of bluestone versus zero, and we repeated this many times. Elston was in charge of this, and we had some really good technical help always. Your technicians are good because they see more than you do sometimes. So your technicians are the best feedback you can get. So on when you're looking at, because you can miss things, but when you're yakking. But anyway, uh, the the um, the crops were harvested, and we found where we put copper on, we got 60 bushels. Where we didn't put copper on, we got 16 bushels or thereabouts. And now I can show this thing. See this thing?
Yeah.
Copper deficiency diagnosis and correction. That's Solberg, Penny, and myself. And we put all our work into that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's got everything in it you need to know. Read the bloody thing. Look at it. I mean, you will look it up. It's AgDex 532-3. It's called copper deficiency. Diagnosis and correction. And I'll repeat, copper deficiency, diagnosis and correction. 532-3. Put down Alberta Ag. It's there on the internet. It's the best, or I mean, almost one of the best downloads you'll ever have. It shows you the pictures and it shows you the answers. I mean,
Yeah.
for God's sake, don't go listening to people who say, it's the cold, wet weather, it's the wet, rainy weather, it's the prolonged flowering. Because unfortunately, you've got nitwits around who will not say, I was wrong. Now, when Lou did this, one of the technicians came to me and he said, Ieuan, he said, this is Lloyd. And Lloyd said, I'm doing the weighings for you, the counts, he says. There's ergots in the checks, but not in the copper applied plots. This is Lloyd Davidson. And I said, oh, come on, Lloyd. Get in the car. We drove right away to the tree nursery to look at it. And I just fell off the floor. There was ergots in the checks and none in the clean. There was maybe the odd one, but none really in the clean wheat. What the hell? This copper treatment is controlling ergots. Then you get into the literature, and the late Denise Maurice then got into the literature because she was a bit skeptical at first. And we found that French work that said if you deprive wheat plants of copper, you get pollen sterility. Then we got into Australian work. If copper levels are low, you get pollen sterility. And then we got some English work that if you have a male sterile wheat, you get open flowers and you get more bloody ergots than grain because now the plant has no pollen, has to open. And these were good research papers. And yet when you put those research papers down, people went poo, poo, poo. They could not think. God Almighty, this was really well done work. So we twigged on that, and Elston and Doug put a number of experiments through, and they worked. I mean, and I give you stories of things like, I can give you a story now on copper, which I'll divulge a bit. Cameron Stevenson, my technician, and he could spot a ring-rotted potato plant at 100 yards. Anyway, we went through the prairies, And we came to one field in Saskatchewan. It was in strange. We stopped by and looked at it. It was 90% wheat and 10% rye. Do you know every bloody rye plant in that field had ergot on it? And we did not find a single ergot on wheat. I offered Cameron $10 if he could find a wheat head with a single ergot on it, and he found none. I mean, and he spent an extra hour looking for it because he wanted that $10. But anyway,
Uh,
there,
Evan,
there, there was another.
we got a question here from the
Yeah,
audience. Nathan Coppert is asking, would copper deficiency influence sterility in brassicas as well? Canola.
I couldn't answer that because it might have an influence, but I really couldn't answer sterility and brassicas on that because it may well have it do that. In other words, you see, because both copper and boron, by the way, are involved in sterility of pollen. Because if like boron is very, very low, that the pollen tube doesn't make it all the way to the ovary, and you get sterility. So both boron and copper can lead to sterility. But in the cereals, we do know the fact that it's sterile, eh? But we don't have enough evidence. Perhaps it does if it's extremely low. You have to use reagents because you need tiny amounts, eh? You know, to get the system going when you think of it. But I couldn't answer that really honestly, although I tried to.
No, that's fair. I'm kind of curious, 80 years in the business, you've been on all kinds of sides of the coin, you know, you've produced a lot of things. You've bred potatoes, you know, got some IP on potatoes, Evan
Extra early
Shears,
tomatoes, if you look in the catalog, Evans
tomatoes,
extra early.
all kinds of delicious things. I mean, and you've been in with academia and you work with producers in the field. In the last 80 years, what's changed? What's stayed the same for the better or for the worse? Where do you think modern agronomy practices are at? Because we have a lot of agronomists on the call making a living from giving their advice to producers. What would you say to them?
I I don't teaching of agronomy is not very well done. I think the best teaching I saw in agronomy was Rob Sykes, program. In other words,
The
the
10-step program there, the
yeah, the program we had and stuff that taught people. We were looking at agronomy then, simply from beginning to end. The and I really enjoyed it. In other words, we went around the prairies and people started learning. Now, the problem today is everyone wants to sell you something and wants to lock you in, and most of them are genuine, and it's a genuine thing. But uh, there are way too many people trying to make a buck with, say, a biological system that probably doesn't work. And they say, "Oh, try this. This will make miracles." No, there are no such things as miracles. It's hard work. In other words, if your field is deficient in nitrogen, you ain't going to get a crop. If it's deficient in phosphate or potash, you ain't going to get a crop.
Mhm.
So, and if it's deficient in a micro, you ain't going to get a crop, or really low. In other words, you've got to ensure that there's an optimum amount of nutrient in that field for the crop you want. And of course, as Elson says, water is the key. In other words, I can grow 100 bushels of wheat in Edmonton, but if I go down to Tabor on dry land, I'm lucky to get 40 or 50 because of the moisture, the ambient moisture there limits the amount. And when you check soil, you see, the thing is, a lot of people don't soil test. You don't have to do it every year. But when Denise Maurice put a program up for soil testing, we found in Alberta only 10% of farmers had ever tested their soil.
And
10%.
when was that?
That was 20 years ago. Now
Yeah.
it's probably up to 50 or 60%.
You
But a lot
think
of
half
farmers,
of the farmers are soil testing now?
well, I could be wrong. We'd have to check with the labs to
Does
find out.
anybody have statistics on that? We had another question coming in here
Yeah.
from Christopher Bond. You hadn't finished why there was ergot in the rye and not in the wheat crop when mixed.
Oh,
Does
okay.
does wheat do a better job of scavenging copper?
No, I tell you, I just deleted an unwanted email from Christopher Barnes again this morning. No, I just remember that. Tell Chris that. No, the reason why
He's
is
listening right now.
wheat's not a better scavenger. There was no problem in wheat in shortage. There was plenty of copper in the soil. You see, but the rye plant is open flowers, so it always gets infected. See, the other thing is the rye is open flowered, so it always gets ergot. If the headlands have got ergot, the rye will get loaded with ergot and it'll float around. But the wheat plants were closed. They stayed closed because there was plenty of copper. Plenty of copper. You remember this? Okay, what Denise and I did one time, we ran field plots for high school kids, school kids outside the ag buildings. And we did it for 10 years before they needed a parking lot or some damn thing. We put in wheat, barley, and oats, as well as the crops like corn and stuff, where cornflakes came from, where oatmeal came from, where carrots came from. We put these plots out, and every year I would look for ergots, and with the wheat, barley, oats, there was wheat, barley, oats, rye, and triticale, and those plots were sort of always side by side, maybe in different locations. And every year, where the plots were going to be, I'd throw ergots over them. We throw ergots every year. We knew that soil was about 3.5 copper. In other words, the soil had good copper levels, 3.5. Because people say in the past, oh, all you needed was 0.5. That was fine if you wanted 30 bushels of wheat. But this land outside the ag building was 3.5 copper. Well, what happened was every year we would get ergot in the rye and the odd ergot in the triticale. We never ever got any ergots in the wheat, barley, or oats because they had plenty of copper. If you've got plenty of copper, you will not get ergot. People keep saying, well, this and that, and maybe the rain, weather, or whatever. You get oddball things. There's a couple of oddball things that will give you ergot. And I'll tell you the oddball ones and get them out of the way. If you get very, very hot weather, one of the DAs in eastern Alberta showed me, if you get very, very hot weather and it cooks the oats, it'll actually kill the pollen in the oats. Now the oats, after a bit of rain the next day, are forced to open. And if they open, they get ergot because the hot weather killed the bloody pollen because the unopened oat grain acted like a greenhouse and it cooked it. But the female parts stayed alive. So then when it came time for a little bit of rain, they opened and they got ergot. Another instance with one of our fieldmen, Agri-Trend guys down in Lethbridge, when we had a hailstorm on the wheat, it bashed the wheat up, not badly, but lightly, small hail, and we had a few ergots in there because the flowers were busted open. And then in Ontario, when I was there, we had wheat that was growing nicely in late May, and the heads were already way up in the tillers, and we got a frost. The frost did not kill the female parts, but it killed the male parts. And so the heads came out minus any pollen. They got ergot. In other words, those are exceptions. 99% of the time, it's copper, 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 copper. Write that down because, in other words, by the way, rye is a very good scour of copper to answer Chris's question.
Yes,
Rye
yes.
has got copper efficient genes and it's very efficient at picking up copper, but unfortunately it's got open bloody flowers and it'll get ergot.
When I hear ergot, I always think of Elston's story about the Vikings taking it as a psychedelic in advance of war to
Oh
enhance
yeah,
their,
they
their
still do.
berserker rage.
They still do in the White House actually. Um,
Steve has put a link to this document that you have claimed would be probably the best download you could get from the internet.
yeah, okay.
So people can click on that. Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate that. Um, just to keep giving folks a little bit of a, taste of what's going to come in the mastermind, and what we're going to do in the mastermind, of course, is we're going to discuss every month what topic would be most pertinent or folks want to touch on, and we're going to build the courses around that. Um, but yeah, we've had a couple questions come in, so I'm going to address that. Sarah McManus is asking, so open pollinating crops are the ones most susceptible to
Well,
ergot?
they're open pollinated because ergot floats around. It just goes, it
It's
infects
airborne.
the ovaries. In other words, the source of ergot is almost invariably in the ditch, right?
Hmm.
It's the wild grasses are open pollinated and they often get ergot. So you look at them, if you keep those cut down, you get rid of your inoculum. In other words, your inoculum comes from there. And remember this, another thing, trick is if you buy wheat, right, a wheat grower, and the wheat grower apologizes to you and there's some ergot in his wheat, that means his wheat is probably cross-pollinated past with other wheat too. Because when you grow rye, it has to be a mile away from another rye field. Otherwise, cross-pollination will take place because that pollen, billions of spores are in the air. And, we can't believe the numbers. So rye has to be a mile away, or whatever the regulation is, from any other rye field. Now, if your wheat is copper deficient and you're a seed grower and you get ergot in it, that means some of the flowers opened. So even though you can clean the ergots out, some of that wheat has gotten cross-pollinated because it didn't have the pollen because of copper deficiency, and they picked the pollen up from a Mackenzie wheat or a Thomas wheat that give it now a change. So there'd be a change in that wheat if you wanted perfection. So the wheat would change. So in other words, seed growers should make damn well sure that their fields have adequate and full levels of available copper. Otherwise, they're losing the purity of the wheat that they're selling. Now, that is a fact again. And remember this, if you do buy wheat of another farmer to plant, right, and you have ergots in it and it's April, you can plant that wheat and those ergots are non-viable. Ergots need a winter outside to become spore producers. So if you buy wheat with ergot in it, don't worry. Nobody tells you that, but don't worry, because that wheat will not germinate. That ergot will not germinate. So don't be panicky. So if I bought 5 ton of wheat and there's a 0.1% ergot in it, relax. No, but if I got a herd of pigs or cows, I'm in trouble because that ergot is toxic as hell. It
Oh
needs
my God,
point
everything's
one.
so connected here. Matthew had a question in the chat, but you must have answered it because he got rid of it. But Mike Muscovy put his hand up. Where did Michael go? I thought Mike was going to come on the call and ask something. Kent Clifford raised his hand. I'll let Kent talk here. I just got to find you here alphabetically. Kent Clifford, allow to talk. Good morning, Kent. You're on mute, my friend.
Hey,
Good morning.
how are you?
I'm doing amazing. How are you, man?
Good, good. Yeah. So no, I actually made a mistake. It raised my hand,
Did you?
but I do want to say, Ieuan Evans, you're phenomenal. You got tons of information. Yeah, I've followed you all through my career. So yeah, just saying hello.
Well, thank you.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Wow, that's great to hear, man. Appreciate that. Thanks for coming on the call. And
Let me say.
what do you say about that?
Well, thank you. Let me say about some mules now. So I mean, I'm not anti-soil scientists, but some soil scientists I'm really anti. Even some pathologists because they cannot accept fact. Now, he's retired now in North Dakota. I went to North Dakota and I got to work with about 5 different farmers who had ergot in their grain because I gave a talk and I told them, anyone with ergots, please get in touch with me. And I went to a course, I gave them a short course on this, and they thought I walked on water because suddenly the yields went from 25 and 30 bushels to 40 and 50 because they had light sandy soil and they were very grateful about getting, control of ergot in there. Now, there was a soil scientist there who was retired now. He retired last year, thank God. And he kept saying there's nothing to do with it. He spent years and years spraying fields with ergot with fungicides and trials. And he concluded in a 5-year trial last year that although he applied the fungicide twice in the growing season, it had no control over ergot. I mean, this dipstick, I mean, would not really listen or read the literature or look at this one fact sheet to tell him, because he was so concerned with himself and his ego because he
Hmm.
said copper has nothing to do with ergot. And
Okay.
another
We got
instance
Mike on
was,
the call here too.
okay,
Hate to interrupt, but Mike, you got something that's burning and churning over there in southeast of Saskatchewan?
Yes, I do today. Hello, Dan. Nice to see you again. Hello,
Thank you.
Dr. Evans. Very nice
thank you.
to hear and be with you. I'd just like to relate one little story that back in the late 70s, I worked for a seed grower, grew certified seed. I spent quite a bit of time running around doing isolation strips. The one particular year, the first thing we always cleaned was his registered, certified, and foundation seed,
Hmm.
and the wheat was going through just fine. Our customers begin to bring in custom cleaning wheat, and they have ergot.
Mm-hmm.
That's my relation to way back seeing what you are telling me. Thank you, Dr. Evans, for that. I have two questions for you, Doctor.
Mm-hmm.
One, in the copper in your studies in this, I have long studied the effects below the soil and a substance called glomalin, which binds soil together and helps our mycorrhizals. And I'm wondering if your relationship and if you can relate that towards Dr. Copper, Dr. Evans. Secondly, last winter, I was fortunate enough to stand up in front of a bunch of people and we had a conversation going. And I advised many of the farmers that one of the first and most important things they could do was listen and read. So, could you explain to me A, glamalin copper, and B, how do you get people to actually listen and digest your work?
Well,
Thank you.
Wow. That's
one
great
of the things
question.
I couldn't
Thank you
comment
so
on
much, Mike.
glamalin because I'm a little skeptical because I did a lot of work. I do a lot of work on diseases right now, even, and I'm writing a text on lily diseases of all things because people have missed out on this. So I couldn't really. You'd have to send me information, and I'll look at it again. Now,
Sure.
what I can say though is I what I was thinking was when I did work with people on use of copper. When I found reluctant farmers, for example, I would turn up with half a bucket of bluestone, right,
Yes.
and say, "Can I walk into your wheat field?" It's I do this at the early stage, I mean, like late May, early June, because I knew the field was deficient, right? And I
Mm,
do a strip down the field about 5 feet wide and about 10 foot long. And then he'd call me about a week later saying, "Oh, this is all bright and green and growing really well. What's the problem?" And I said, "Copper deficiency." And Doug Penny even did one better. We had a farmer in Camrose, and he went 30 bushels, and the wheat looked terrible and very patchy. So Doug went in and contracted 15 pounds of bluestone an acre on that field, and the guy put the same wheat crop back in that field. And that year, he took the wheat off and got 70 bushels instead of 30 of sample. He got 70 of number two. And Doug asked him, "What do you think of it?" He says, "Oh, it might have worked."
yeah.
So,
Yeah. Try to
What,
get them.
Mike, I wanted to ask, what is your interest or outcome that you're looking for regarding this glomalin? And I
I'm
can
not sure
get,
what glomalin is, though. Is it a fungus? Is it a mycorrhiza or
it
what?
is a protein-like substance found in soil that is produced by arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, MAF, or
Yeah,
AMF.
yeah, yeah.
What's
It's a,
your interest in it, Mike? What are you looking at
well,
there?
uh, okay, glamalin in particular is your soil binding particles. It helps to reduce inputs, reduce disruption of your hyphal network, and canola does not produce glamalin,
Yeah.
which is a little bit of a negative towards that crop. Good protector of the hyphae and soil aggregates, works in no-till and undisturbed systems, can last for 10 to 50 years. And I almost have the thought that I spent the first half of my farming career changing cultivator shovels and burning diesel fuel to try and destroy the glanolin or all of that underneath the ground. Now I've spent the second half of my career trying to rebuild and get my glamalin back. I have one very interesting story for you about the copper or your sodium phosphates. Dad would always apply it to the dugout to help reduce the algae growths, and this was a standard practice. We did
Yeah,
it
yeah.
once a year. Mom also collected water in a rain barrel by the house, and that's what she used to water all of her flowers and flower gardens. So
Hmm.
Dad put some in the rainwater barrel to keep it from growing algae, exactly like he was doing in the dugout. And
Mhm.
Mom always loved that rain barrel. And you're saying to me today, there might have been a very good reason.
Well, it could well be. In other words, I mean, I when I first moved here, there's different crops, different responses. For example, I grew onions and they wouldn't grow in my garden. I did a soil test within a year of coming here, and my soil was desperately low in copper and zinc. And I got one of Rob Sykes' mixes, Prairie mixes. He gave me a big bag of it, about 50 pounds, and I spread it over the cultivated area, and my onions the next year were about a pound each. In other words, it was deficient. You look at things like that, and you can rectify them. And one of the most spectacular things we saw was lac labiche, and now this applies to flax again. Flax is terribly susceptible to low copper, and people do not twig on it. Elston noticed flax in, is it lac labiche or Bonneville? And being Elston, he got a truck and he brought in God knows how many hundreds of pounds of topsoil, 6 inches of topsoil from that area where the flax had failed. And he put it in a demo field experiment in like a block at Ellerslie, Edmonton. And well, we put the flax in there because one person said the flax was deficient in potash. So we put flax with potash, we put flax with nothing, and we put flax with copper. I mean, there was no question. The potash didn't work. The untreated didn't work, but the copper, God, the flax took off. In other words, flax is very susceptible. And I remember dealing with a farmer, Elson dealt with a farmer in Viking, and he was getting 20, 22 bushels of flax an acre. And Elson, I urged him to push up his nitrogen and phosphate levels and really lay on, was it about 3 or 5 pounds of copper and 3 to 5 pounds of zinc. That year, I know that guy got 40 bushels of flax. In other words, deficiency is deficiency is deficiency. Yeah, soil scientists put these bloody barrels up and show that the leak in the barrel is the weakest link. Well, the weakest links have become, in some instances, micronutrients. A weakest link could be copper, it could be sulfur, it could be nitrogen, phosphate, or whatever. But pay attention to the micros. I mean, the battle I had in Manitoba, by the way, I was recommending zinc to a few farmers there. I got crap for it. Well, what do they need zinc on corn for? Well, I'd come from Ontario, and if you didn't put zinc with corn, you got half the bloody yield. Those are micronutrients. They're needed in small amounts, but they're absolutely bloody essential. I'm not saying going out and put every field with it, but if you see ergots on your cropland when you grow wheat, that's the canary in the coal mine. If you see some ergots, a couple of ergots, you probably have some mild problems. But if you see a lot of ergots some year, you may well have a serious copper deficiency problem. And like I say, it only shows up in wet years or years where the rainfall is calculated to stay in the top foot.
Yeah,
As
we have a question about that actually from Chad. Mike, are you good? Did you have any other comments or questions?
No, great. I just listening and look forward to the recording. Thank you, Dan.
I love your comments about listening. And to that, I would say most folks, when they're in a conversation or a meeting, um, they're not necessarily thinking about what's being said. They're thinking about what they're going to say next, and that reduces your ability to absorb what's being shared. So, good comment there. Listening and reading, very valuable life skills. Now, Chad Scott is asking, Southwest and Saskatchewan got exposed this year from ergot in Durham and wheat. The years before then, they did not have ergot problems. Why do you think last year was an outlier? Seed quality or copper deficiency? How long did the spores remain dormant? And I'd also give you a bit of a 10-minute warning here, and we want to show people what we're going to be outlining for the course. So we're going to bring this plane into land here shortly. The mastermind sessions, frankly, can go for a couple hours
okay.
if we want, but
The
bring it
answer
bring
they
it
got
home.
lots of they
Bring it
got
home.
lots of rain. They got lots of rain. If you get lots
They
of
got
rain,
lots of rain. You were just saying that,
you
yeah.
your crops are going to stay in the top foot, and the top foot is the most efficient. And when you get lots of rain, you activate all that humus in that soil, the residues, right? Well, the bacteria are better at getting copper than the wheat plant is. So the bacteria need copper, the fungi need copper, the all the bugs in the soil need it. They grab it because now they've got an organic source and good moisture. So what happens is it gets tied up. And then the poor wheat plants are copper deficient, they open their flowers and they get ergot. Now, then you pay attention to the source too. If you've got headlands with wild weeds or grasses in them, that's your source. If you keep those headlands mown all the time, at least by the early June, you reduce it. And ergots only last 1 year in the soil. They do not last more than a year if the ergot bodies fall in the soil. Because I'll give you another example of a field. We were looking at a field at Bear Hills, south of Edmonton, there by the Hobima Reservation. They're called Mazawakis now, anyway. But if you go down there, there was a field there with a farmer who regularly grew 60 bushels of wheat, and he practically grew wheat after wheat. He wanted to find why he got a real bad ergot year 1 year. Well, we went there and we put some plots in there. Doug Penny put the plots in, and I analyzed them as well. It was loaded with ergot. Well, what happened was some parts of the field where it was dry, the field went by 60 bushels, as it usually would have gone. But where Doug had his plots, the foliar treatments with copper went about 38 bushels each. The untreated went 16 bushels. And this is another thing now, a little back. Where the copper was sprayed on after anthesis, there was a negative drop in yield. There was 12 bushels an acre. Now that's been shown a few times now. If you apply the copper on too late at anthesis, you'll get a drop in yield and you'll still get ergots. In other words, that was the problem. Now I can say that field, we went back to next year, and Jill pointed this out to me, Jill DeMulder. The field was bone dry the next year. Do you know, we looked in 160 acres and we failed to find a single bloody wheat plant with an ergot in it. Because now the dry soil had forced the wheat to go down 1 to 2 feet. Lots of copper down there. So that's the story, whether you get it and don't get it. It's to do, and the moisture has nothing to do with prolonged flowering. It's to do whether the availability of the copper is there. In wet soils and regular rain, it's not available. In dry summers, in dry weather, the roots go down, copper's available because we still have large reserves of copper 1 to 2 feet to 3 feet down in the soil. And it's
Love it.
simple, but I
Love
can't
it.
get a lot of soil scientists to think that way.
Nathan Coppert is asking, in order to do a copper trial on triticale, is it better to use a soil applied product or a foliar product?
Triticale rarely gets much in the way of ergot anyway, but the copper would be, if it's deficient, it would get a yield boost. And another thing about copper is, I did a thing on a farm in Athabasca, and the guy was definitely copper deficient soil, and I got him to put copper on, 5 pounds of actual copper, 20 pounds of bluestone an acre. And he did that. This is when copper was cheaper. And he put that on the field. And I said, what happened? He says, well, I got the same yield, 52 bushels. And I said, did you put any extra nitrogen or phosphate? No. I said, I told you to put extra N, P, and K on. Well, I said, but I did. He says, my wheat ripened 2 weeks before the neighbors. I said, the neighbors said at the same time? Oh, more or less, he said at the same time. Mine ripened 2 weeks and I got number 1, and all my neighbors got sample because it rained for 2 weeks, a week or so. In other words, it speeds up the maturity. It's same like phosphate. If your phosphate is low and you add it to your crop, it speeds up maturity. And you see, you should read. What I've got you now is while you're thinking of this, I have a YouTube, and you can write this down. And if you read this and look at it, you will get the answer. Write down on YouTube, lodging wheat rescue. And I repeat, lodging wheat rescue with Dr. Copper. And I repeat again, lodging wheat rescue with Dr. Copper. And you won't get a better video than that. I'm not a professional, and the guy who did it wasn't a professional, but it shows you what happens. And you'll see that where the wheat's growing by the road that's never been disturbed and the copper levels are good, it's off and mature, and the rest of the field, it's a bloody mess.
Okay, doctor. I think we got a great conversation going here. I appreciate all the questions today. Obviously, Dr. Ieuan is an endless fount of experience and knowledge, incredibly passionate. I also love when he does other people's voices in the conversation. I really like that part of it. He's quite an entertainer, so I'm looking forward to this. I've had it. I hope everybody can see my screen share. I don't know, Doctor, can you see what I have up here? Are you seeing my screen share too? Are you seeing the course outline as well? Doctor,
Yeah.
are you
And
able to
Charlie, we
see
can
the
see where your roots is on. Yeah. Well,
so
when that is a question, right?
yeah, there's
Well,
a question here.
on roots,
Well,
is
Jill
it?
DeMulder was commenting, Chad, it would be interesting to see where your roots and soil moisture ended up, any moisture probes.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you one interesting thing was I was with Rob down in southeast Alberta, and we were the Hat Dry colony, and it was a dry year. And Rob worked very hard that day. He dug down 3 foot to show that there was still barley roots down at 3 foot because it was a dry year and it had gotten down there. The crop looked good. It wasn't a huge crop. It looked like a 50 bushel crop, but he showed them that there were roots down that deep. Now, in other instances, when I've gone to say a wet year and you dig down, the roots either they get smothered or they don't go down very deep because a lot of land will be sort of will smother. In other words, canola is susceptible to this. When you get a lot of rainfall, and you can go down 6 inches to a foot, but below that the soil becomes saturated or it's slow to ease out, and that is drowning. In other words, water will drown or cut out the oxygen supply because the bacteria will take it up, and you get the roots cut off. Then, in fact, they'll be cut off by the soil, lack of oxygen. So the only good roots are in the top 6 to 8 inches, eh? That's another thing. Just down and dig always, dig up plants, dig up roots. I grow lilies and look at diseases and stuff, and I'm always digging them up and looking at them and checking. I mean, some diseases are curable, some are problematical, but you have to know what you're doing. It's a biosystem.
So I gave everybody a glance of the curriculum there that we're going to be working through. Completely 110% open to what folks might want to see and hear in the course, and it's going to be a very interesting journey. We're gonna start rolling here in a month or so inside of the course, and yeah, I think Ian, you're willing to talk about what folks are interested in. I'll just give you a quick look at the community that we have going here. You can ask questions, and the classroom, similar to what we've been doing with Greg's course. All of Ian's knowledge is going to be recorded here, and there'll be transcripts and the links that he mentions and papers that he brings in, any material, research, or whatever will be added there, so you can all watch it at your leisure and go back and digest what's being shared and said and ask questions directly. It's designed to create certain access to experts like Ieuan. So it's $29 US a month or $299 US per year. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to going on this journey with everybody. It's a dream come true to have such a legend coming on the platform, and we'll do our best to capture your knowledge, Ian. So I think with that, we're at the top of the hour. Do you have any parting words for the folks
Yeah.
on the call?
I hope at the end of this that people think fact. Growing a crop is a factual thing. It's not a belief. I was told by, I was taught by, I read by. Look at the facts. Find out the facts, and you may have to research or go through the internet. There's some excellent write-ups in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, but a lot of you don't access them. There's some good facts there, and go for the factual writers. I mean, you see, and remember this. In other words, you think, soil scientists, not soil scientists, plant breeders. Now, there are very good plant breeders around, right? But I have this thing to say about them. They're very good plant breeders. In fact, there's some boastful ones who never did anything, but there are plant breeders. But I worked with potatoes, and the potato I worked with was called Netted Gem or Russell or whatever it was called, or Gem. It was the one potato that McDonald needed. So 70% or 80% of all potatoes grown in Alberta and on the prairies and in the US would have been this one variety produced by Luther Burbank, Russet Burbank, it was called, or Burbank or whatever. It had a one name, a different name. It was called an Idaho Baker, but it was the same potato. It was Luther Burbank's russet potato. Well, When I first started in Alberta, the average yield was 7 to 8 tons an acre. Oh, that was a good yield. Now, Clive Shopmeyer did a lot of work on potatoes in Alberta. I did some echoes behind him. I went down to Washington State. The growers there at Moses Lake were buying Alberta seed, but they were getting 24 to 34 tons an acre. What were they doing? Oh, cooler climate. They preferred the Alberta potatoes. I'll go through that story again if you want to, but they preferred the Alberta seed because it was clean. But what were they doing? Warmer climate? What? No, it wasn't. They were putting a hell of a lot more nutrients on. They were putting the kitchen sink on. They were putting 2 or 3, 400 pounds of nitrogen, phosphate, and putting on. They were really putting it to the spud crop. And in Alberta, they weren't putting the nutrients on. When they started following through then and putting the nutrients on, the average yield in Alberta now, with the same potato, the exact same potato, has gone from 8 tons an acre to 18 and 20 tons an acre. It's, in other words, the nutrients counted, not the plant breeding. Plant breeding is fine and does a lot of work, but don't forget it's the nutrients application, the amount of nutrients, and the balance of nutrients brought those spuds up and tripled their yield. The consequence now is Alberta is the biggest spud producer in Canada, followed by Manitoba. Prince Edward Island is third. And people talk about Prince Edward Island as the garden of Canada. That's bull. Prince
What
Edward
about
Island,
Saskatchewan? What about Prairie Moon potatoes in Yorkton,
oh,
Saskatchewan?
they grow up a number of spuds, but it's much smaller than the other two provinces. But
Okay.
they, but
Okay,
when
let's
you go to PI, you got to point this out. The average pH in the soil in PEI is 3.5 to 4.5. That's the average pH across the island on the 350,000 acres that they grow crops on. It's 3.5 to 4.5. So don't call that a garden of Canada. It takes half the lime from Nova Scotia to bring it into production. Anyway, go ahead.
All right. Well, thanks so much, everybody. It was awesome. Obviously, we've got a lot more to extract from Ieuan and all of his experience and knowledge. So looking forward to it, folks. Thanks to everybody that attended. Thank you,
We can
Doctor.
say das Ende.
What language are
Das
you
Ende,
talking in?
German.
Okay. I
Et
should
fin,
know that.
Italian.
Maybe I'll know more languages by the time I'm done here too. But thank you, everyone. We'll see you in the next one. Take care. Thanks,
Thank you.
Doctor.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate it. Bye for now.